One of the issues that we find is that there's an issue of relevance. Is the church relevant to the people and to the community that it's in, and does it have relevant ministries for today? One of the ways I kind of communicate relevance is in a simple story that comes out of my own personal life, and that is that I had the privilege of knowing my great-great-grandmother. Knowing my great-great-grandmother, she was somewhat caught in a time capsule in which that she did not want to move into the 20th century, much less to the 21st century. She liked the way things were, and they worked fine for her, so she wasn't interested in moving forward in methodology or means or processes to maybe make life even easier for her. As a result of that, one of the pieces in her home was an ice box. And when I say ice box, I don't mean a refrigerator. I mean an ice box. There's a few people here that know what I'm talking about, right? All right. An ice box is a box that has two divisions in it. One side is where you put the product. The other side is where a delivery man comes out and brings a big chunk of ice on a regular basis. And that side of compartment has a little fan sometimes, and it will cool the other side of the area. If you want a glass of tea and you want iced tea, you have to take an ice pick. And you have to chisel away at the big block of ice. And while you do it, chips and shards are flying everywhere in your kitchen and all over the floor, and you get wet spots everywhere. But she's perfectly content to have an ice box with a big chunk of ice. Now, I not only knew my great-grandmother, but I also knew my great-great-grandmother. I also knew my great-grandmother. And my great-grandmother, she was a little bit more contemporary, so she actually had a refrigerator. Now, it was still pretty old, and it didn't have some of the modern-day technologies. And so in her particular refrigerator, she didn't have an ice maker, so she was still using those aluminum trays. Remember those aluminum trays that when you put them in there and froze the water, they would sting. You'd get freezer burnt on your fingers every time you got one out. And then when you cranked the handle, ice went flying everywhere, and you got about 50% of the ice that was frozen in that metal tray as a result of that. Well, she was very content to use those aluminum trays. She didn't see the need to update her refrigerator at any point, so she was still operating with that. Well, I also knew my grandmother. And my grandmother, she would come along a little bit further, and she didn't understand why you'd want those aluminum trays that would sting your fingers. So she had kind of stepped it up a little bit, and she had the blue plastic trays. You know, the ones that didn't sting your fingers as much, and you fill them up with water and put them in the freezer, and you run them underneath the water, and just a slight twist would loosen up those little cubes, and you could put them into a tray, and you could dish out of that tray whenever you needed to. And then, you can just keep seeing the progression. When my mother got her first refrigerator, she decided she didn't want aluminum trays or blue trays. She wanted an ice maker. So when she opened up the freezer compartment, she could reach in there at any time, and there would be a supply of ice that she could get, and she could put it into a glass or whatever she was preparing, and she could have ice on demand by doing that without having to get trays out and break trays open and all those kinds of things. When my wife and I got married, she decided she wanted to go a step further. She said, why in the world do we even need to open up the freezer door? Why can't we get one of those refrigerators that has an ice machine on the front door? And you walk up to it, and you can just put your glass there, and ice starts dispensing out of it. And, of course, we have an argument because I like crushed ice, and she likes chunky ice. So we had to find one that you could push a button on, and I can get it chunky, or she can get it chunky, and I can get it crushed, or whichever way we want it. And we never have to open up the freezer door. Now, my point is relevance. Each generation is delivering the same product, ice. But the delivery changed with the times. We're not talking about changing the gospel. When all the things we talk about, we're not talking about changing that Jesus is the only way of salvation and that there's no other name under heaven whereby men might be saved but by the name of Jesus. We're not talking about changing anything doctrinally. What we're talking about is changing the delivery system in which it's delivered, because the delivery system has to be relevant within the culture. Look at all the social media methods that we just have listed here, and this is probably not a complete list. You probably know about 3 or 4, maybe 5 of those, Facebook, maybe a few of those options that are out there, but there are literally thousands of different kinds of communication tools that are in place today that people are feeling more connected or receive vision casting or get the message more clearly through a variety of other means other than just those traditional methods that we've had in the past. So relevance becomes one of those critical issues.